and welcome to the fifth Friday Speaker Series lecture of spring 2014. I'm Juanita Johnson-Bailey. I'm the director of the Institute for Women's Studies. Stand still, okay? I'd like to take this opportunity to ask our staff, faculty, and affiliate faculty to please stand so we can recognize you. Thank you. I think it's always good to know who they are, and hopefully you'll get a chance to speak with them, and that will encourage you to maybe take some of our classes. They are wonderful. It's my honor today to introduce our speaker, Daleah Goodwin. Ms. Goodwin is a PhD candidate in the Department of History at the University of Georgia. She received her bachelor's and master's degrees in history from Florida A&M University. Her research focuses on Black women's identity and organizational activism at the turn of the 20th century. Ms. Goodwin teaches Intro to Women's Studies and serves as a writing-intensive teaching assistant for the core courses in Women's Studies. She received the Outstanding Teaching Assistant Award in 2007 and the Teaching Encouragement Award in 2008 for her superb classroom abilities. In 2009, the Institute for Women's Studies and the Graduate School awarded Ms. Goodwin with its highest honor and most prestigious teaching honor for a graduate student, the Excellence in Teaching Award. Having also received the Presidential Honors and the Outstanding Graduate Student Award in 2013 from the University of Georgia Graduate School, she holds the distinction of being our most celebrated graduate teaching assistant. Her talk today is an account of these women, Hallie, Quinn, Brown, and the institutionalization of Black women's history. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Goodwin.
Good afternoon. Hope everyone is well. Again, my name is Daleah Goodwin, and I would like to thank everyone for coming this afternoon. I want to thank Terry for filming and all the work she does in coordinating all of the Friday Speaker Series events. I also want to acknowledge two of my professors and mentors, my major professor, Dr. Daleah, Associate Professor of History and African American Studies here at UGA, and my other mentor, Dr. Hallie, Associate Professor of History and African American Studies here at UGA as well. And my presentation today is entitled An Account of These Women, Hallie, Quinn, Brown, and the Institutionalization of Black Women's History. So a little backstory to how we get to this point. When I decided to come to graduate school, I knew that I wanted to do Black women's history. Not sure what do it meant, but I knew I wanted to do Black women's history. And at that time, I had my heart set on looking at Black women business owners or something that involved Ida B. Wells Barnett. Well, Paula Giddings, who's a historian, published a 600-page biography on Ida B. Wells in 2009. And I believe that Ida B. Wells Barnett lived a rich life and that there is much for historians to uncover, but I didn't think that my dissertation would be the place to try to delve further than the 600-page biography. And so my other interest area was involved Black women business owners. And as I began to locate them in history, I found that many of them were affiliated with the National Association of Colored Women, an organization founded in 1896. But it still wasn't coming to me. It still wasn't like I still wasn't doing Black women's history. I hadn't gotten that thing. And so I was venting to Dr. Lee about this, and she suggested that I thumb through the volumes of Black Women in America, which is an edited 3-volume encyclopedia set by Darlene Clark Hine. And in Hine's words, Black Women in America is both a celebration and an acknowledgement of the magnificent scholarship that now exists in African American women's historical studies. It contains topical and theoretical essays in addition to biographies. Go through it is what Dr. Lee told me. Write down the names, topics, ideas, and then when you find something interesting, come back and talk to me. So I did. And in my study of that encyclopedia of Black women's lives, I read the biography of a woman named Hallie Quinn Brown. She was from Ohio, and I was from Indiana, so immediately we had that Midwest connection. I felt close. She was an elocutionist. I was like, what was she doing with electricity, right? But she was doing nothing with electricity. She was an elocutionist, which is a person skilled in the art of clear and expressive speech. And Brown was just not anybody's elocutionist. She was lauded by a European newspaper as one of the finest female elocutionists in the world. She was esteemed by an American journalist as a woman with few superiors and no equals, and celebrated amongst her colleagues as a woman of rare power and skill. She was also an advocate for women and helped found the Black Women's Club movement. And I thought back to my business women in Ida B. Wells, and I wondered, I said, are they in any way related and connected? And in fact, they were. So I was super excited. I also learned of a book that she wrote in 1926 entitled Homespun Heroines and Other Women of Distinction. She wrote, "To my readers, greeting. This book is presented as evidence of appreciation and as a token of regard to the history-making women of our race. One chief object of these introductory sentences is to secure for this book the interest of our youth, that they may have instructive light on the struggles endured and the obstacles overcome by our pioneer women. It has been prepared with the hope that they will read it and derive fresh strength, encouraged from its records to stimulate and cause them to cleave more tenaciously to the truth and to battle more heroically for the right. The characters and facts herein set forth are veritable history. In presenting this volume to the public, it is proper to remark that it has been prepared from a settled conviction that something of the kind is needed. It is our anxious desire to preserve for future reference an account of these women, their life and character, and what they accomplished under the most trying and adverse circumstances, some of whom passed scatheless through the fires of tribulation, only to emerge the pure and stronger, some of whom received their commission even at the furnace door, the moment thinking that all was lost forever, the next in secure consciousness of the everlasting arms. We lack a complete record of these sacrificing heroines, but such as we have been permitted to gather, we present through this medium to the public, hoping that it may find as much pleasure in its perusal as the writer had in its making." Hallie Quinn Brown, Homeward Cottage, Wilberforce, Ohio, 1926. With this book, Brown created a document detailing the experiences, stories, and history of Black women that would also empower younger generations and encourage Black women. My presentation this afternoon is an excerpt from my larger project, which is the dissertation, A Torch in the Valley, the Life and Work of Miss Hallie Quinn Brown, 1850 to 1949. So using homespun heroines, I illustrate Hallie Quinn Brown's presence and role at the forefront of Black women's history as a theorist, researcher, collector, and preserver. 28 women documented the moments in the lives of over 60 different women for homespun heroines. Brown uses a style called prosopography or collective biography to present an account of her subject. Lawrence Stone defined collective biography as the investigation of the common background characteristics of a group of actors in history by means of a collective study of their lives. Robert Lanning further describes collective biography as the biography of many individuals in relation to many social institutions, in relation to the ideology of time, and in relation to the contingencies of their own lives as proof of the viability and legitimacy of the social order in which they existed. In other words, collective biographies provide the scholar and the general public with historical and biographical information of several people connected through blood relations, through friendship, social organizations, or ideology. Among the earliest collective biographies of African Americans included Abigail Mott's biographical sketches and interesting anecdotes of persons of color in 1826. And I just listed these on this slide and the next slide. We won't go through all of them in depth, but this is just to provide you with an overview of what I'm talking about. So, and I'll just make a couple of notes on some of them. Now, Mott's collection of sketches is distinct in that it represents the efforts of white abolitionists in the 19th century to sort of create a community and documentation of the experiences and potential and possibilities of black people, showing that slavery actually retards development rather than benefits or helps people, as was commonly thought. Now, to be sure, African Americans contributed to the growing body of literature as well. We have William Wells Brown, The Black Man, His Antecedents, His Genius, and His Achievements. And this stands as the first existing example of collective biography by an African American. Now, although he used the word man in the generic pronoun form, his text offered life sketches of black men and 3 black women, right? So just don't want to forget about them. And he used this to refute images of negative images of black inferiority. We also have Men of Mark by William J. Simmons. His did not include any women to in his offering. Then we come to 1891 with Susie Shorter's Heroines of African Methodism. Now, Shorter's work stands out in that it constitutes the first collective biography of black women by a black woman. So up until this point, what we see is we see collective biographies being written, some of them including women, most of them not, but they have not been done so by women at this time until 1891. Post-1891, Monroe Majors, Lawrence Scruggs offer a collective biography solely devoted to women in 1893. And they represent the examples of collective biographies of black women by black men during the era. In 1894, Gertrude Mossel's The Work of the Afro-American Woman, which is a very influential text in terms of understanding black women's lives at that time. In addition to books, collective biography also appeared in magazines of the era. Pauline Hopkins had a column in The Colored American, Famous Negro Women, and then a parallel column called Famous Negro Men from 1901 to 1902. We see also that churches published collective biographies accounting of those individuals, and many of them were overlapping with some of the aforementioned biographies. Elizabeth Lindsay Davis, The Story of Illinois Federation of Colored Women's Clubs, 1922, she authored a collective biography of sorts of black women. And so then Brown's publication in 1926 mirrors many other historical works, yet it remains recognizably different in that it was a collective biography of black women written by multiple black women. So all of these are written by one person. Hallie Quinn Brown's collection was written by multiple women, and that's what distinguishes that text from the other texts. Now, as demonstrated by the examples here, few collective biographies devoted completely to the experiences of black women existed, and women authored only a handful of those. And I do not intend to suggest that you must be a member of a particular group to write a history. That is to say that only black women can write black women's history. However, the black women authors examined in this study asserted a particular insider knowledge that authorized and emboldened them to document the experiences of black women. Randall Burkett contends that Homespun Heroines is a collaborative effort by a group of self-confident and historically self-conscious black women who were determined to preserve the stories of sacrifice and struggle that their forebears had endured. Now here you see a list of the 60 subjects in Homespun Heroines. And my purpose today is not to outline all of these, so no one get nervous. It's not to outline all of these people, but rather to give you an overview of some of the themes and larger applications that I want to make with this work. So as the authors recorded the lives of these women, they used descriptive phrases such as our Joan of Arc, right? Joan of Arc, a French heroine who led an army and even sustained a cannonball blow to the head, you know, and apparently kept going, right? So, you know, real strong woman right there. Another subject was a real Molly Pitcher, right? Molly Pitcher's a Revolutionary War heroine / folk legend. There's a little confusion as to whether or not she's real or if she's an imagination. But whatever, they appropriated her. And Molly Pitcher is a woman who assists soldiers in battle, especially during the Revolutionary War when her husband is injured. She brings water to the troops during, you know, the war. She's, you know, dodging bullets and everything. So she's taking one for the team as well. Finally, Julia Ward Howe is another woman that they say, this is our Julia Ward Howe. Now, she was an abolitionist. Right? She was very active in, of course, in anti-slavery and also educational reform. And here's a little extra nugget for you. Howe wrote the words to the Battle Hymn of the Republic, which has been appropriated as whose fight song? UGA. Yes, UGA. So that'll be for you for trivia night. Julia Ward Howe. She wrote the original words and then they were appropriated by UGA. So anyways, now others did not use proper nouns to describe their subject, but rather uses phrases like, quote, a mother, the teacher, or perhaps my personal favorite, quote, being, however, unmarried, to describe all of the women, though, held the title of either a homespun heroine or a woman of distinction. In Brown's Encyclopedia, the actual phrase homespun heroine appears only once. Brown wrote, Harriet Tubman may be justly styled a homespun heroine. This historic character is in a class to herself. She had the skill and boldness of a commander, the courage and strategy of a general. Now, in literature, the phrase homespun heroine, or the more common homespun hero, is most widely associated with a person involved in war or some sort of military campaign. Two novels of the era, Heroes in Homespun, Scenes and Stories from the American Emancipation Movement by Ascot Moncrief, and A Hero in Homespun by William Barton, both wrote in the 1890s, provide insight into the hero in homespun character. In these novels, the protagonist receives the title hero, or as we are talking about heroine, for either surviving or contributing to the survival of the unit or the community when by all accounts they or the community should not have survived, right? Everything is set against them. They have no special skills or formal equipment. It's their everyday activity, the seemingly mundane and the regular or generic behavior that they display or provided in the face of incredibly adverse circumstances that made them heroic. So styled a homespun heroine and followed by the military reference, I suggest and followed by the military reference, I suggest refer to Tubman's everyday activity that qualified her as a heroine and not perhaps her involvement with the Union Army during the Civil War. She believed in a basic and fundamental right, a right to one's person, and assisted at least 400 people in securing their freedom. This she did under adverse and hostile circumstances. She was a wanted woman with multiple bounties for her life, and without an army. She spent most of her time not in homes, but in the swamps and tangled brush under the veil of darkness. And she even died in a destitute condition. Yet, right, she survived and contributed to the survival of a community when by all accounts they should not have survived. People should not have made it from the South to Canada or to wherever it is that they were going to secure freedom, right, under the condition of that time. The homespun heroine also emerges as a character type and model of womanhood during Revolutionary America, 1770s, very much along the lines of the Republican motherhood. Now, this is not our Molly Pitcher image that, fighting on the battlefield, helping her husband type of thing that's going on. This homespun heroine is cast as a woman who contributed to the fight for independence and freedom from British tyranny through domesticity. Specifically, the homespun heroine received this name because she rejected imported fabric from Britain and wove cloth for her and her family. The fabric was not smooth that she wove. It was not smooth or it was not soft because it was not processed, right? It was rough and prickly and uncomfortable. But to participate in this demonstrated patriotism and a symbol of sacrifice, that you would wear this uncomfortable clothing to be down for what will soon be Team USA. That's what is going on here. Now, Booker T. Washington, founder of Tuskegee University and very influential person at the turn of the 20th century in terms of assessing financial resources for African American education and his philosophy of black racial uplift, recalled, "I can scarcely imagine any torture except perhaps the pulling of a tooth that is equal to that caused by putting on a new flat shirt for the first time." That would be homespun clothing. It is almost equal to the feeling that one would experience if he had a dozen or more chestnut burrs or 100 small pinpoints in contact with his flesh. On several occasions, when I was forced to wear a new flat shirt, my brother John generously agreed to put it on in my stead and wear it for several days till it was, quote, broken in. Now, the women in Brown's study reveal their experiences with homespun clothing. Wearing a homespun clothing and enduring what felt like 100 small pins served as an allegory for what scholar Darrell Sue identifies as microaggressions. The everyday, nonverbal, and environmental slights, snubs, or insults, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative messages to target persons based solely upon their marginalized group membership. An isolated incident or single prick may be irritating, but not debilitating. An onslaught of pricks, or a continual prick on already raw skin, undermined a person's strength and their overall resolve. So, in other words, what we see going on here is that in spite of everything, in spite of what we see as slavery, lynching, violence, economic exploitation, racism, sexism, classism, disrespect, misrepresentation, marginalization, insert whatever here, right? To get up and cook breakfast for your kids, like one of the subjects, Susan Vachon, who was called a mother, is heroic. To start your own hair care line and confront ideals of beauty like Madam C.J. Walker is heroic. To establish a safe space for women like Victoria Matthews or Fannie Jackson Coppin is heroic. I contend that Brown implies that the social, economic, and political climate for black women forced them to wear homespun, and as the biographies demonstrate, black women like Booker T. Washington's brother often wore homespun in the stead of others till it was broken in. These are the authors in Homespun Heroines and Other Women of Distinction. And as much as there is to learn from the subjects, investigating the lives of the authors proved to be very interesting to me. And these authors amassed a wealth of information. Now, the process by which Brown organized these women, determined who was going to write what, how it was going to be submitted, all of that, I've not located any records of that. Either they don't exist, but what I do think happened is that they were actually destroyed when the library where her collection is had a tornado and ruined most of the collections there. I think that was part of it that got destroyed. Nevertheless, I have drawn my own conclusions. Like most of the other authors that we see here, Brown was not a professionally trained historian. Possibly only a handful of these women received formal training as a historian, and unfortunately, that fact leads scholars to exclude homespun heroines as an academic contribution. A review of the work in The Messenger, a popular 20th century African American periodical, regarded homespun heroines as, quote, silly. So silly that to intelligent grown-ups, it appears ridiculous, end quote. The recent work of Harold Bovey and Deborah Gray White encouraged scholars as well as the general public to reconsider such a conclusion. Bovey asserted The history of black women's historians, especially during the progressive era, constitute a dynamic narrative challenging us to revisit the lives of lesser-known black women scholars, reconceptualize conventional definitions of what makes one a historian, and rediscover valuable scholarly insights. My research in this part of my work follows the conceptualization and categorization that Dak Bovey uses to examine black women historians. He puts them into 4 categories. 1, progressive era novelists. 2, historians without portfolio. 3, accomplished and professionally trained scholars, though not formally trained in history, that published historical scholarship and engaged in rigorous historical research, and 4, professionally trained historians with doctorates. Now, although Brown and her colleagues do not fit neatly into these categories, I find that the model Dak Bovey offers is the most conducive model for my research at this time. The 2 categories that most aptly describe Brown and her colleagues are the historians without portfolio and professionally trained scholars not formally trained in history. Earl Thorpe contends, from the 1890s until the Civil Rights Movement, there existed a group of black historians without portfolio, a group of non-professional persons who have a fondness for the discipline of history, feeling that their life experiences peculiarly fit them for chronicling some historical events. Daleah Beasley, that's the first name that you see on the left here. Daleah Beasley, author of a selection on California women, provides one such example. In 1910, Beasley moved to California with the intentions of writing a history on African Americans in California. She created her own research project, beginning with an analysis of all California newspapers, identifying pertinent facts and events. And much of her history came from oral interviews that she conducted, and it's unclear as to how she even financially supported herself because she was not affiliated with any institution at this time, or pretty much at all. But she traveled up and down the state, collecting and doing these interviews. So her book comes out, California Trailblazers: African American History in California. When her book comes out in 1919, the academic community blasted her work. Right? The Journal of Negro History editor Carter G. Woodson wrote, quote, "It is much hodgepodge that one is inclined to weep, like the minister who felt that his congregation consisted of too many to be lost, yet not enough to be saved." Ouch. Now, Brown obviously felt different because by the second printing of Homespun Heroines, an excerpt from Beasley's California Trailblazers appears in that volume and in all subsequent printings. Although without portfolio, some of the authors in Homespun Heroines held secondary educational degrees in other areas and some advanced degrees, and in some cases advanced graduate study, and received professional training in their area of specialty. Marchita Lyons authored 8 biographies for Homespun Heroines. Lyons graduated from Providence High School in 1869 and began teaching in the Brooklyn public school system and served as an assistant principal. She took private classes in language and music at the Brooklyn Institute. She became a noted speaker, even training, wait for it, Ida B. Wells Barnett. Once again, going back to my connection, everything comes all back together. But she trained Ida B. Wells Barnett in the art of public speaking. Josephine Turpin Washington held a degree from Howard University. Hallie Quinn Brown had a bachelor and master degree from Wilberforce. Many of the subjects of Homespun Heroines held degrees as well. The significance of this point is that these were educated women. Many of them were academically educated women, although not in the field or discipline of history. And as my dissertation will show and explore as to why perhaps we don't see black women as historians until post 1950 in mass numbers. However, the point is that emphasizing the educational attainment of these women's points to the fact that they had to take a different course because they were women. So at this time, many of the colleges that did accept both African Americans and women admitted the female students to a ladies course, which Anna Julia Cooper said was inferior in scope to the regular classical course. So what you would have to do is apply to then take the gentleman's course is what would happen. And many of the women of this study, that's what they did. Hallie Quinn Brown did that, Anna Julia Cooper, Frances Coppin applied for the gentleman's course and graduated with actually a bachelor's degree rather than a certificate of whatever area. Although black women were widely and often systemically excluded from participating in mainstream U.S. and African American academic culture, Dagbovie reports African American female historians created a range of coping strategies, survival mechanisms, and alternative ways to approaching and writing history. They created their own professional organizations, such as the Association of the Study of African American Life and History in 1915 and the Association of Black Women Historians in 1979. Francil Wilson claims the Association of Black Women Historians functions as a professional home for black women who are historians and the central location of support of historical research on black women. Darlene Clark Hine added that the Association of Black Women Historians became the institutional infrastructure of the Black Women's History movement, just as the Association for Study of Negro Life and History served as organizational foundation of the Black History movement. And so I want to suggest that Homespun Heroines occupies an influential space in what we have come to understand as historical scholarship on black women's history. Furthermore, despite being unlettered, these women produce what Dagbovie called, quote, innovative, polemical, and vindicativeness, as well as insightful, accessible, and practical historical scholarship that even Darlene Clark Hine's Black Women in America volume could use as a model. Historical scholarship, yes, that Darlene Clark Hine's 1993 Black Women in America could use as a model. The same series that I referenced at the beginning of my presentation. So, as I discussed in other points of my research, Brown articulated a specific philosophy of education that centered on themes of Christian moral education and equal educational opportunities for each gender, which she believed would lead to black racial uplift. And her educational paradigm reflected social advancements of the coming 20th century and situated women as engaged with the political climate around them and as informed voters and useful citizens. Homespun Heroines was a strategic step in her plan of black women's empowerment. Homespun Heroines institutionalized black women as a subject of serious inquiry. When something is institutionalized, it becomes part of a structured and well-established system. To do so, Brown's focus on the women's self-confidence, interests, work, ideas of service, vulnerability, and collective commitment to black women defined these women as an independent class of people. And I use class here not in economic formation, but rather cultural production. When reviewing the women of Brown's study, a class consciousness is a brewing with their collective interests, goals, and recognizable enemies as it relates to black women and other racial and gender groups. And we never forget that the ways that gender and race intersected always forced black women to negotiate dual systems of oppression in ways that black men and white women did not. Brown also used the act of documenting and writing a book to institutionalize black women's history. Her strategic use of collective biography made the lives of black women accessible and meaningful. Stephen G. Hall argues that collective biographies of African Americans offer tangible meanings of racial possibility from within the black community without merely mimicking white American beliefs of progress, possibility, or showing African Americans in the Accommodationist Act. The collected biographies became a powerful and efficient tool for disseminating life sketches and stately portraits of lead, successful, and representative women and men. It presented the reader with a familiar, approachable reference group against whom character and success could be measured. As a sketch of the progress of others through life, it was a map to follow with examples of choices made at particular junctures, which the reader might apply to her or his own life situations. So Hallie Quinn Brown produced a cultural artifact that placed black women in the historical conversation using their own voices. It helped introduce us to the expanse of black women's experiences and create a space for the modern field of black women's history. An account of these women inspires people, and especially black women who are in homespun. An account of these women aims to remedy the psychological effect of racism and sexism on black people's self-esteem and sense of self-worth. An account of these women that Homespun Heroines offers preserves black history. This book elevated Brown into a leading voice on who and what people should know about black women as they transitioned from slavery to freedom. Homespun Heroines shared the voices and lives of prominent black women, and it also introduced the voices and experiences of everyday or lesser-known black women. An account of these women corrects ahistorical imaginings of black women that emphasize white benevolence and black dependency. It reconstructs historical memory and combats the continual omission and misrepresentation of black women in history. An account of these women counters the singular narrative of black women and illustrated the heterogeneity of black women. It celebrates the tenacity, resiliency, and hope of black women. An account of these women illustrated our common humanity as parent, child, sibling, spouse, or more specifically, as it relates to the women of Homespun Heroines, mother, wife, daughter, sister, lover, and friend. Thank you. We'll open the floor for any questions, comments, concerns, observations. Yes.
I noticed right away, I love everything. I noticed right away Susie Shorter's name. She wrote about Methodism as one of your earlier writings. And then she is one of the people who had her biography written. Were they writing biographies of women who were still living, even though it was a history in our Homespun Heroines? Were some of those women still alive, even as they were being written about?
Yes.
They are.
Yes, they were. So several other women are still alive, and the relationship between the subjects and the authors is another aspect of my research that will be explored in my larger project. But these weren't just like people who picked these names off of a list, right? These were people who were intimately connected with their subject. So Susie Shorter has a biography in Homespun Heroines that her daughter wrote about her. Right, and so it provides us with the insider account, right, and very important information that we learned about how she conducted her home, right, and it was a very special way to say, hey, I think my mother is a heroine, right, because not everybody's mother writes a book, but a way to pay homage and celebrate and really acknowledge the women. So there are a lot of interesting connections like that. Yes. Many of the women were still alive. Yes. Yes. Yes.
Okay, Ms. Goodwin, I have a question. You gave a reference to one of the contributors focusing on black women's experiences in California, and I'm just curious, in terms of Hallie Quinn Brown's collection, how geographically diverse was this collection? Because from what you're telling me, it's not just centered specifically in the South or just the North, but there is a proliferation of different experiences that attempt to capture black women's reality. Right,
yes. Very good question. So I think that her effort to include Daleah Beasley does represent an effort to expand geographically, because up until that point, all of the subjects were from the Mississippi east. Okay. Now, there are subjects from from the South, but a lot of the women came from Ohio, where Brown was from, and then they branched off, right? Or they'll come from New York, right? And so what we see is these sort of enclaves of black culture producing very powerful women in these locations. So in Brooklyn, we have maybe 3 or 4 biographies of women, club women from Brooklyn. Right? Now another thing is that collective biographies could also be used to promote a certain ideal, and black people in Ohio is not something that people often think about as this, oh, this is a bustling, center for achieving, black progress. And I think that Hallie Quinn Brown was trying to recenter that conversation, to put it in the conversation and demonstrate what was all going on in the Midwest. Yes.
I'm curious about this phrase, being, however, unmarried. Can you just share a little bit more about that? Because that just made me chuckle.
Yes. So Henrietta Ray, that's the woman that is being discussed here. And Henrietta Ray goes on to write a book about her father, and she takes care of her sister and everything. But that was what was used to describe her, and I don't know if I really don't think that it was done so in a malicious way. I just thought it was funny because it seemed to be completely irrelevant to what was going on. But there is something about the fact that she was unmarried, and because she was unmarried, we see why she was unmarried, because she was taking care of her family members. Right? So then that gives us insight into another issue that I explored, because Hallie Quinn Brown was not married, in this idea of that women were supposed to get married, and that's this idea that we have at this time, when in fact there were some women who were unmarried, and that was okay. That wasn't something that was disparaged because they participated in specific activities. So she could do all of this stuff because she was unmarried.
Thank you.
Yes.
That resume, I collect missionary biographies from the same time period, and so many women writers published as Mrs. and his name. Does she always, is a real feminist statement that she always uses just the name of her writers and the name of her subjects, and then none of them are Mrs. and his name?
That
So
was
they're
so
all just
nice.
like the way you wrote them?
Yes. So some.
There's a Mrs. John.
Some of the women, these are the authors. Some of them, okay, this is, here's the one that I want. What, do you see Mossel? Okay.
Mary E. Mossel?
No, that's not the one. Okay, I'll address it and then I'll find it in a minute, address your question. Some of the women use their married name. We do see them introduced as Mrs. Such and such. We also see women introduced as Auntie Mac, right? And it's interesting, the way that people choose to identify them, because much of it comes from the perspective of the biographer and what their relationship to that person was. So in some cases, women, if they knew that woman benefited from the respectability that using a Mrs. Husband's name, yes. This is what I was trying to refer to. Gertrude E.H. Bustill Mossel, the work of the Afro-American woman. Now that book, I have that listed here as that, but she actually published that as Mrs. N.F. Mossel, because her husband's name is Nate, right? And so she did that. Joanne Braxton, when this book is republished, Joanne Braxton, a scholar who explores why these women would use their husband's name as part of the politics of respectability And because that would afford them greater, what's the word that I'm looking for?
Credibility.
Yes, greater, thank you, greater credibility.
And then absolutely, the white women did it too, and almost all of them in religious circles. But so does that mean that Brown didn't really exert any editorial control? Evidently, when a biography came to her, she left it as is. If you want to call yourself Mrs. or Auntie or whatever, she didn't have a controlling editorial force that she went through and standardized things like that. So there's differences across the biographies.
No, the biographies all have a similar format. But in terms of the names, I think she was very insistent upon using the name that either the person had or that the biographer chose to represent that person because of the politics of naming within Black community. And let me just explain the Aunt Mac the Aunt Mac reference. Hannah MacDonald is actually one of the women that is discussed, and everyone called her Aunt Mac. Now, she was unmarried. She was the sister-in-law of Daniel Payne, who was one of the AME ministers. But she was unmarried. She had no children. But she lived in a college town, and she was known to look after the college students. And so clearly, they weren't getting ready to, these children, were not getting ready to call her Hannah, right, by her first name. And so to show that sort of relationship and affinity that they have for her, they called her Aunt Mac. That was not a term that white people were using to talk about her. That was how she was known amongst the Black people in Wilberforce, and her contributing to the overall development of a historically Black college community. Yes, I just want to clear that up. Yes. Okay. No. Yes.
I'm curious about this kind of dichotomy that you set up at the beginning, because you say like our Molly Pitcher, our Joan of Arc, these very powerful women who defy gender conventions, right? I mean, Joan of Arc literally is leading men out into the field and become sainted, and yet some of the women you were talking about that are described in the biography are doing very, you use the word microaggressions, but I'm thinking microexpressions, like daily acts that are truly heroic, but aren't to that same scale. But I imagine there are women in the biography who are doing, in their own way, very landmark, big-scale heroic acts. So how does the collective biography treat these two different types of heroism? The daily acts, like you were talking about, like that, we're breaking into homes from, getting up just to make breakfast for your children while you're facing these multiple types of aggression, versus the, being the first woman to write a book or do something. Is there a way that it's tackling that duality? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a great question. I just want to write that down. Okay. Yes, that's a very good question. I don't necessarily think that there is a hierarchy in heroic efforts. I don't think that one type, like Harriet Tubman, I don't think that what she did was any different, as Brown is trying to put forth, any different than what, let's say, Susan Vachon did as being a mother, right? I don't think she's trying to create a hierarchy there, but I think she's trying to show the spectrum of experiences, and she's trying to show that there are multiple ways that you can live as a Black woman. There are multiple expressions of Black womanhood, right? There are different identities, right? So if you want to be a mother, go for it. If you want to be a doctor, go for it, right? I think that's one of the things that she's trying to put forward. And I do also think, though, that there is something with the use of our hero person. I do think there is something with the sort of appropriation of that and taking that on as empowerment. Yeah, but I have to explore that a little bit more. But thank you for that question. That's great, Laura. Thank you. Yes.
That makes me wonder, how does she have them organized in the book? Like, does she link together the biggies? Because I think the essence of the book is we are all heroines. It is a heroic stance to live in a oppressed society, and what you're doing is, the place I am doing it is feeding these children in this situation. I'm not sneaking 3,000 slaves off the plantations at night into the river like Harriet Tubman did, but this is right. I think the whole thing to put them all in the same book is to claim heroism for all of them. Is kind of what she's doing. But does she group them in the book, or
Yes.
is it just alphabetical, or what?
I have them listed here alphabetically just because it's aesthetically pleasing to me. In the book, they're arranged by date of birth. So the first one is Sarah Allen. She's the oldest person that we see there. And then the youngest person is Sarah Jones. And they're all between the 17th and 1800s born.
That's still nice because you're right, it doesn't valorize what they did. Date of birth is a very neutral kind of thing, and it says we're all heroic in whatever sphere we are. I think date of birth is a wonderful way to organize.
Yes, ma'am.
I was just thinking that date of birth is also interesting because it establishes that there is a chronology and that this is not just in the last 5 years, this is what we have been doing. But that there was literally a long history of this going back to the 18th century.
So who's first? Who's earlier than Phyllis Wheatley in the book? What's the
Sarah Allen.
Sarah Allen?
Yes, Sarah
Richard Allen.
Allen. His mother.
His mother.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, if there are no further questions, or you want to ask other questions, or see my whole concept map of how all of these women are connected, I can show you that. But I would like to thank everyone for coming. Really great questions and comments. Thank you.